Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're going to get started in about 7 minutes.
Good morning. Now, you would figure at this point, with this being the last regional hearing of this commission, that we would have finally gotten a gavel. We still haven't gotten this gavel. I'm not going to let this commission end without getting this gavel. That's going to be my parting gift. It's going to be this gavel. So, in the tradition of not having a gavel, here it goes. But welcome. Thank you for being in this hallowed space. We call to order this regional hearing in the county of Carroll of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I hope you all are here with the right mind and right spirit that is required to explore this history, to accept this history, to acknowledge this history, and hopefully be empowered to do something with this history. This is a living example of what law can actually do for the people if it's done for the people. And so we are grateful for this opportunity to spend this time with you. So as I review today's agenda for this hearing, you may also reference it on the screen. It will begin with a hearing of House Bill 307, followed by a reading of our protocols for conduct and testimony. After which we will go into the story, the narrative summary of the known victim in Carroll County, Towson Cook, on June 2nd, 1885 in Westminster, where we are right now, along with the presentation of the research committee's research and process for the cases. You will hear that as well following the narrative summary. Then we will transition to the most sacred element of this hearing, which is descendant testimony. And what we mean by descendants is that can be direct descendants of the victims, that can be descendants of those who are connected with this case, or even descendants of the neighborhoods, the communities that are affected by this legacy. After which we will have an intermission, and once we return, we will then move to the phase of the hearing that focuses on expert witness testimony, during which the commission may respond or ask questions of the expert witnesses after they've concluded their testimony. And then lastly, we will open up the floor for public comment. So before we begin, always like to give appreciation to Living and Growing. Ms. Caitlin, Mr. Sonisha, if you want to quickly stand and just raise your hands. Thank you for being here. They are here because we know that what we are exploring this morning and this afternoon is not the easiest thing to hear. It is not the easiest thing to listen to. It is not the easiest thing to realize actually happened to human beings. So it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to say that you need to process, and they are here to help you with that process. Please utilize their insight and their wisdom as you need to. As you see, we have an American Sign Language interpreter. We try to do our best to be accessible so that all can learn, all can receive the information and wisdom that will be in this space. Before we begin and move on, we would like to recognize a dignitary that has joined us this morning. We do not take it lightly when people in power want to be in this space with us, those that they serve, because they have made the conscious decision, and we thank you, to bear witness to this truth, to bear witness to this history. They're going to hear it just like the rest of us going to hear it. And hopefully they too are empowered to do something with this history. So with that, we give much praise and honor to the esteemed mayor of Westminster, Dr. Mona Becker. So I'd like to recognize my colleagues and the staff of this commission, without whom none of this is happening. So what we'll do is we'll just go down the line, starting from left to right, and then we'll quickly acknowledge those commissioners who are joining us virtually, as well as our staff, some of whom are in this space with us as well.
Hello. Hello, I'm Amy Millen, and I am a commissioner. I've been appointed by the Governor of Maryland as a member at large, and I also chair the Logistics Committee.
My name's Elizabeth Hughes, and I serve on the commission representing the Maryland Historical Trust, which is Maryland's State Historic Preservation Office.
Chris Haley, representing the Maryland State Archives, chair of the Research Committee.
David Falconley, representing the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, and I am the chair of the commission.
Nicholas Crary, representing the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project and chair of the Reconciliation Committee.
Taisha Dupree Wilson, representing Coppin State University, and I'm a professor of history and African American studies.
Thank you. And quickly to recognize our commissioners who are joining us virtually, Commissioner David Armenti, Commissioner Carl Snowden, Vice Chair Charles Chavis, and Commissioner Lindsay Baker. But we want to give love to all our commissioners because we know, hey, we ain't getting paid for this. So this is of our time and energy, and we recognize that it's fluid. So we honor those who show up however they show up. So we give appreciation to Iris Barnes, Simone Barrett-Williams, Michelle Coles, Maya Davis, Holly Fisher-Hickman, who just joined us, which is awesome, Robert Parker, Marshall Stevenson, and Stephanie Sewerth. And to our staff, who's really the backbone of this commission, Trish Floyd in the back, who I know many of you have had interactions with, Kristen McFarland, who is also joining us from the Office of the Attorney General, as well as Sophia Sike and Zanita Hurley. So much appreciation to you all. You know how much I love you. All right. So at this time, we will have the reading of House Bill 307. So I would like to recognize Madam Assistant Attorney General Kristen McFarland, who will cite that specific statute that allows this hearing to happen. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As the chair said, my name is Kristen McFarland. I am an Assistant Attorney General with the state of Maryland, and I am going to read the legislation that created the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The legislation was signed into law in April of 2019. It has since been amended to extend the commission's sunset date from 2022 to 2026. The act states as follows: whereas lynching or the extralegal murder of an individual in an act of mob violence is a violation of the rights to due process and equal protection of the law. And whereas at least 40 African Americans were lynched by white mobs in Maryland between 1854 and 1933. And whereas no person was ever tried, convicted, or otherwise brought to justice for participating in these racially motivated lynchings. And whereas various state, county, and local government entities colluded in the commission of these crimes and conspired to conceal the identities of the parties involved. And whereas these crimes far exceeded any notion of justice, just retribution, or just punishment, but were intended to terrorize African American communities and force them into silence and subservience to the ideology of white supremacy. And whereas no victim's family or community ever received a formal apology or compensation from the state, county, or local government entities for the violent loss of their men. And whereas restorative justice requires a full knowledge and understanding and acceptance of the truth before there can be any meaningful reconciliation. Now, therefore, be it enacted by the General Assembly of Maryland that there is a Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The act further provides for commission members consisting of representatives from the Commission on Civil Rights, the State Archives, Maryland Historical Trust, the Commission on African American History and Culture, the Maryland State Conference of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of African American History and Culture, the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum, the Maryland Historical Society, the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, the Lily Mae Carroll Jackson Civil Rights Museum, Maryland's 4 historically Black universities, Bowie State University, Coppin State University, Morgan State University, and the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, with 4 public members appointed by the governor. Staff for the commission is provided by Bowie State University in consultation with the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project and by the Office of the Attorney General. The staff member provided by the Office of the Attorney General may issue a subpoena for the attendance of a witness to testify or for the production of documents in connection with any investigation or hearing conducted by the commission. The commission shall hold regional hearings open to the public in areas in which a lynching of an African American by a white mob has been documented. Receive from the public, including those from the families and communities affected by racially motivated lynchings, recommendations for addressing, engaging, and reconciling communities affected by racially motivated lynchings, including the erection of memorial plaques or signage at or near the sites of racially motivated lynchings. And make recommendations for addressing the legacy of lynching that are rooted in the spirit of restorative justice. In the hearings, the Commission may research cases of racially motivated lynchings for which there is no documentation, should those cases be brought to the Commission's attention, and the involvement of state, county, and local government entities and relevant news media in cases of racially motivated lynching. On September 1st, 2020, the Commission submitted an interim report of its findings and recommendations to the Governor and to the General Assembly. On or before December 1st, 2025, the Commission shall submit a final report of its findings and recommendations to the Governor and to the General Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Attorney General. And at this time, I will recognize Commissioner Amy Millen to explain the code of conduct for the hearing and explain the process for testimonies and public comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the public had the opportunity to submit testimony via email to mltrc@maryland.gov prior to today's hearing. Throughout the hearing, questions and comments from members of the public attending in person may be recorded on paper provided by Ms. Floyd, who was at the back of the room moments ago, or when the time comes, will be invited forward to speak at the podium. Those attending virtually are invited to email comments and questions to mltrc@maryland.gov. We will read them during that public comment period. Please provide your name and organizational affiliation, if any, and limit your comment or question to no more than 2 minutes. Questions and comments, as well as live testimony, must be limited to the topic of discussion for today's hearing. If your comment or question is off topic, it will not be included in the hearing or your live testimony will end. Comments, questions, and testimony should be presented with decorum and the respect appropriate for conducting this public hearing. Any comments or questions containing obscene language or language inciting imminent violence will not be addressed, and any live testimony containing such language shall end. Those comments and questions collected during the hearing will be shared during the public comment section. Finally, please note that members of the media may be present during today's hearing, and as such, public comments, questions, and testimony may be broadcast or printed by news outlets.
Thank you, Commissioner Millen. As you all came into this space, I'm sure you all saw the Maryland State Trooper who greeted you at the door. You see Event Stream Team who is capturing this moment, and I believe we have representation from the Baltimore Banner. So let me be clear. We ain't playing with you. We ain't about that life, okay? If you are not here for truth, if you are not here for healing, if you are not here for justice, here's your warning now. Get out. We good? Thank you for the thumbs up. I appreciate you. All right, okay. So we can proceed. All right, let's go. So at this time, I would like to transition to the history and the case narrative of the known victim in Carroll County, Mr. Towson Cook. And at this time, I would like to introduce Ms. Jennifer Lyles. Ms. Lyles is a public historian with a focus on Maryland history. Her research into the lives of families throughout enslavement, Reconstruction, and the turn of the century helps to preserve and interpret the state's rich and complex past. Her research and lectures attempt to connect the past to the present while helping communities understand their heritage and shape their future. Thank you, Ms. Lyles, for being here.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay. I want to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to be here to give my research to everyone and also to go through the life of Towson Cook. So I want to just begin with saying thank you. The life of Towson Cook began in approximately 1866 in Carroll County, Maryland. He was born to Augustus and Margaret Cook. He was the third out of 4 children. His father was born in 1812, the same year America was fighting the British for the second time. While he was born in Maryland during that time, we do not see any official records of his existence or that of his family until 1870, years after the Civil War and slavery ended in Maryland. It was in this census that we find the family Augustus and his wife Margaret, who is 25 years his junior, his sons Dennis, Roderick, Townsend, and a daughter Mary, all living on a farm of Henry S. Davis in New Windsor, Carroll County. Augustus and several other African-American men and their families lived on the property as farm laborers. On this document, we learn a little bit more about Townsend's family. His mother is listed as mixed race, as is his eldest brother Dennis, who was born in 1860, Roderick, born in 1862, Townsend and Mary, born in 1868, are listed as Black. This being the first document that we can find the family leads us to believe that the family were most likely enslaved and therefore were not named in the previous censuses. In 1880, the family is still living and working on the property of Henry S. Davis. On the census, we gain more information about what the family is doing 10 years later. Augustus is now 68, and still working as a farm laborer. Dennis, who is 20, Roderick, who is 17, and Townsend, who is 14, are all working as farm laborers as well. Mary, who is 14, is at home with her mother. This is the last official documents that show the family together. Since the lynching of Townsend takes place in 1885, the census of 1890 is not available. We can go forward to see the course of the lives of Townsend's siblings. This is where we're able to find the living descendants of Townsend, all distant nieces and nephews. Augustus is actually found in the newspapers. In 1875, there were 2 cases in which his father, Augustus, was the victim of assault by 2 different men. One very important notice is also the inclusion of the voter rolls, and in 1873, we can find Augustus's name as a qualified voter of Carroll County. The lynching of Townsend had a tremendous effect on the family. Their roots, long lived in Carroll County, came to an end. Watching the chase and lynching of their brother, the brothers were very quick to find other living arrangements and lives outside of their childhood home. There is no information regarding the death or the situation of his parents post his lynching. We do not find them again in any official records. With his mother being much younger than his father, it is a possibility that she had maybe remarried or moved in with her daughter, who I was unable to find. Dennis, the eldest, had left Carroll County shortly before the lynching and moved into Baltimore City. On the 23rd of June, 1883, he marries Elizabeth Aquila. They stay in Baltimore and Maryland until at least 1887. It was in Baltimore that they have their daughters Minnie in 1884, Edna in 1887, and by the time of the birth of their son Herman in 1889, they were living in Philadelphia. Here they had 2 more sons, Clarence in 1892 and Frederick in 1895. Expecting to find the growing family together in 1900, it is unfortunately that this isn't the case. Elizabeth is not found on the census, and instead we find Dennis with a new wife, Bessie, who was born in 1880, living on Colonna Street in Northwest Philadelphia. The children are not with their father and his new wife. Instead, we find evidence of only 2 of the children, Herman at the age of 9, who was located at the home of destitute colored children in Philadelphia on Burke Street and Old Lancaster Road. The home for destitute colored children was founded in 1855 by Mary Jeans. It was a Hicksite Quaker women's charity which would provide shelter and education for Black children and then either place them in private homes or within apprenticeships. This location closed in 1922 and the name was changed to Sunnycrest Farm for Negro Boys and moved to Cheney, Pennsylvania. Dennis is not able to reunite with his family. He dies in Philadelphia in 1909 at the age of 51 from tuberculosis. We find his oldest, Minnie, in 1910, married to Theodore Jackson and living a few doors down from where her father lived in 1900 on Colonna Street. Theodore was a laborer. Minnie does not have a job, but she is taking care of her youngest brother, Frederick. He is 16 at the time and working as a laborer at the stables. In 1920, Minnie and her husband are living in Washington, D.C., working as a laborer in the government building and as a cook for a private family. Theodore dies in 1925 and leaves Minnie a widow. with no children. She makes her way back to Philly and to her family, living with her brother Frederick in 1940. It is there she lives until her death in 1948. The eldest and the youngest connected meant that despite the family situation when they arrived in Philly, they were able to stay reconnected at various points of their life. And I take pleasure in knowing that they were still a connected unit of family. Dennis's other children, Edna, married Alonzo Roan, but did not have any children and died in 1926 at the age of 38 of uterine cancer. Herman is found in Atlantic City in 1920 during its heyday, living at a boarding house and working as a laborer in contracting. In 1940, he was a permanent guest and janitor at the Liberty Hotel on Baltic Avenue. The Liberty Hotel was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2020 due to being an important place of accommodation for African American tourists in Atlantic City. Constructed in 1928 and located in the African American neighborhood of Northside, this hotel was listed in the Negro Motorist Green Book, Ebony Magazine, and the Baltimore Afro-American. Herman may have spotted many of the famous African Americans who made a stop in Atlantic City at this time frame, who were barred from the white hotels and had their accommodations at the Liberty. Herman had never married, and by the time of his death at the age of 73 in 1962, he had returned to Philadelphia, having retired. Clarence was found in the 1900 census living with his sibling at the home of destitute colored children. By the First World War, we know that he served in the Company E, the 368th Infantry during World War I. He had served overseas from the 3rd of August 1918 to the 15th of February 1919, and was honorably discharged on the 4th of March 1919 at Camp Meade in Maryland. The 368th was part of the Maryland 92nd Division out of Camp Meade. All of the regiments attached to the 92nd, including the 368th, were composed of black enlisted personnel and junior officers. The senior officers were white. The 368th were assigned to a French Army division due to the segregation of the U.S. Army. The unit participated in the Lorraine and the Meuse-Argonne campaigns, and I apologize, I do not speak French well. It served the greatest number of days in combat of any U.S. regiment. They returned to Maryland after the armistice. Based on the address given during his retirement, we know that he was a laborer and also lived on Dallas Street, where we find Frederick and his family living. So again, the siblings are connected. Clarence Edward dies in 1959 at the age of 67, having never married. Getting back to Frederick, he served in World War I as well, stationed at Camp Meade from October 1917 to January 1918. After the war, he meets and marries Mary Morton. They have 3 children, Fred, Clarence, and Lulu. And it is from this line that we have living descendants. While these are all nieces and nephew of Townsend, as far as we can tell, he did not have any children, nor did he marry. We also can't find any information regarding his sister Mary. And we can see that Roderick did not have any descendants either. The living descendants have found memories of their extended family, the children and grandchildren of Dennis, but have no stories or information about Dennis or Townsend. They were unaware of their connection to Townsend and Maryland and the lynching that took place. From what I was told, their family was close, very close. They lived in the same area of Philly, and some continue to still have connections to Dallas Street today, where Dennis's grandchildren lived for multiple generations. While Townsend and the story of his lynching did not reach down the many generations, I am sure that the family being aware of his lynching and his connection to their lives is something that they will continue to reconcile with going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lyles, for the testimony, the historic framing, and honoring the narrative of not just Townsend Cook, but his family. Now, at this time, I recognize Commissioner Chris Haley, who serves as chair of the research committee, who will present on the committee's process and the research findings as it pertains to this moment in time. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2019, then Governor Larry Hogan signed into law the creation of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Among its legislative mandates was to research certain cases of racially motivated lynching. General examination, research, reflection, and actions to document the history of racial terror lynchings in Maryland arguably began with the study produced by lawyer A. Briscoe Koger in 1918. This record of documented murders, of extrajudicial murders of African American men in Maryland, documented and spanned the years 1889 to 1918. Subsequently, an effort was launched by Dr. David Taft Terry in 2001 at the Maryland State Archives, where he then served as research director for the Commission to coordinate the study, commemoration, and impact of slavery's history and legacy in Maryland. During this time, the span of the racial terror atrocities Dr. Terry covered expanded to 1854 to 1933. The archives continued its research efforts and placed them online in a website entitled Judge Lynch's Court in 2006, which continues to be accessible today. In approximately 2016, MLTRC Commissioner and Reconciliations Chair Nicholas Creary led students of his at Bowie State University to labeling the victims with names such as evil, beasts, and rogues after looking further into Maryland's history of lynching and the demonization of these acts in newspapers and periodicals in those terms. Since then, many individuals and organizations have continued this work to recognize, study, and seek to understand how such egregious acts of inhumanity could be perpetrated, justified, and left unpunished for so many years. In addition to those working under the auspices of several county Maryland Lynching Memorial Project organizations, this commission applied for and received an Emmett Till federal grant to, among other things, hire the services of Baltimore-based Heritage Associates, a local research team which has helped us immensely to keep this work going. We encourage all of you to encourage others to submit any information you might have or stories you may know of to contact our page of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because as the work, the respect, the reconciliation did not start with this commission, it also does not stop with it. It remains within each of us to keep this task and the memories of those who suffered alive. Thank you.
Thank you again, Commissioner Haley. So at this time, we are now transitioning to our testimony period of the hearing. And again, I remind you that any testimony that would like to be submitted can be done so, as Commissioner Haley mentioned. Please go to the website for the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There is also MLTRC at maryland.gov. That is the Commission's email address. If you have any information, any stories, any narratives, any materials that you want us to be aware of, please do not hesitate to contact us. This testimony period, as I mentioned before, is a sacred moment within a sacred moment. And again, we recognize all the forms of descendants that do exist when it comes to this legacy. So in some cases, we do have direct descendants of victims. Sometimes we have descendants of spectators, descendants of perpetrators, descendants of systems that allowed for racial terror lynchings to occur, descendants of the communities that were most terrorized by these acts. And so we recognize it as a moment in time. As Commissioner Haley said, this work did not start with the commission. It will not end with the commission. It is an ongoing journey. So we honor those who are able to share their stories at this moment, and we honor those who will share their stories in due time. So at this time, I would like to recognize Pam Zappardino. Dr. Zappardino is a member of the Carroll County Lynching Memorial Project and professor in the Graduate and Professional Studies Department at McDaniel College. And at this time, she will introduce two community descendants. Thank you, Dr. Zappardino.
Thank you. There are two gentlemen that we would like to hear from today. One of them is deceased, and one of them is nearing 90. And we were hoping to have him here in person, but he is not feeling well. but we have both of them on video. I believe we're looking at the video from Warren Dorsey first. And Mr. Dorsey was born, just to give you a brief bio, in the southern part of the county in Sykesville. He was one of, I want to say 12 children, but I'm not quite positive. But he came from a very large family, and that family continues to be a part of the Westminster and Carroll County community. The name Dorsey is a very proud name in this community. Mr. Dorsey passed away just after his 101st birthday, a couple of years ago. So many of us have had the chance to meet and talk with him about his history. I think we may even on this video have one of his proudest things, which is his singing. And it led to his meeting his wife when he was in the military and many other adventures that he had. So I'm not sure who is going to start us with that video.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, my name is Roxana Harlow, and I'm joined this morning by my colleagues.
I'm Pam Zappardino.
Hi.
And I'm Jack D'Annunzio.
Hi.
And together we represent the Carroll County Coalition of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project. We are conducting this oral history interview as part of the Maryland Lynching Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Oral History Initiative. Today is Saturday, October 23rd, 2021, and it is currently 10:24 a.m. Eastern Time. This interview is being conducted in person in Frederick, Maryland. We have the distinct honor and privilege to be conducting an oral history interview today with Mr. Warren Dorsey. Mr. Dorsey, thank you very much for agreeing to interview with us. We really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure.
And we thank you for welcoming us into your home.
I want to talk about an earlier case of lynching that, as I mentioned, Townsend Cook was a young black man aged between 19 and 21 years old, and he was lynched by a white mob in Westminster on June 2nd, 1885. So that would have been 35 years or so before you were born. Much like the story you described of Mr. Shepard, he was accused without evidence of being in a relationship with a white woman, perhaps raping her, again, without evidence. And he was hanged, and his body was mutilated on what is now Route 27 between Mount Airy and Westminster. Townsend Cook had two parents, Augustus Cook and Margaret Cook, and he was also survived by his siblings, Dennis, Roderick, and Mary. We don't really know much else beyond the fact that there was a very cursory investigation, as you mentioned, was very common, especially with regards to African Americans who had been murdered. As I mentioned, I know that this lynching happened decades before you were born, but I'm wondering if you have any family memories, recollections, if anybody in the community ever spoke about a lynching that happened in Westminster or ever spoke about a Cook family?
No. I know of people being found dead and no explanation of how it all happened. Mm-hmm. Because there was a body found just above the house where I was born, just up the hill from there. No explanation of how it happened. But that was, you see, if you were African American, often investigations were a joke.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, based on the information that we just gave to you about Townsend Cook, your reaction to hearing some of that information, if it surprises you at all that a lynching occurred in Westminster?
No.
Not at all?
Not at all.
Okay. Why?
What happened to African Americans over the years, so far as being investigated, to get to the root of it often is a cursory kind of treatment, if any at all. So it doesn't surprise me.
Right. I'm wondering, we don't know very much about what happened after Townsend Cook was murdered. We don't exactly know what happened to his family. We know his parents stayed in Carroll County. They're both buried at Fairview Cemetery. Based on your own experiences and some of the cases of sort of unsolved murder that you're familiar with, I'm wondering if you could surmise how Townsend Cook's family would have reacted in the aftermath of his lynching, and how the African American community in Carroll County would have reacted in the aftermath of the lynching.
You accept the reality of the time and move on. We know very well, even today, similar cases may receive no more than cursory kind of investigation. We know this is true, so you accept the reality of what has happened and try to move on.
And do you still sing now?
Yes, indeed.
Do you think we could convince you to sing just a little bit for us?
You don't want to hear me sing that.
Oh, yes, we do.
The song that I play around with a lot is sort of a anthem.
Okay.
Little David, play on your harp. Hallelujah, hallelujah, little David, play on your harp. Hallelujah. Little David, play on your harp. Hallelujah, hallelujah, little David, play on your harp. Hallelujah. When David was a shepherd boy, he killed Goliath with Joshua. David, play on your harp. Hallelujah, 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 David, play on your harp. Hallelujah. Little David, play on your harp. Hallelujah, 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 David, play on your harp. Hallelujah.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Part of the work of the Lynching Memorial Project is to make sure that the history of lynching in the United States, as well as the people whose lives were taken, are not forgotten. But there are different views on whether or not that's a good idea. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on whether or not we should teach young people the history of lynching in this country, or not. Is that a good idea or bad idea?
I think if you ignore your history, you're bound to repeat some of it, which will be tragic.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Thank
Very
you.
straightforward answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stop the recording.
The next video is Mr. John Lewis, who I mentioned is about to turn 90 soon during this year, which I think means he was born in 1935. And he has lived in Carroll County his entire life. And he speaks to what he saw and what he did. He was a kid here. He worked here. He saw how things were. He was a civil rights advocate here. You'll hear a little bit about that. For this, I brought my hat because his wife Jean and I years ago took it upon ourselves to encourage Carroll County women to return hats to their wardrobe, and John thinks it's hysterical. So this is in honor of John and Jean, the hat. As I said, Mr. Lewis would love to have been here today, but his wife called me last night and said he just wasn't up to it. So I am so glad that we were able, this video is just less than a week old. So we were able to catch him on a really good day when he was willing to tell a lot of stories. So I think we're ready for this video.
I'm speaking with Mr. John Lewis, who was born in Carroll County, Maryland, has lived in Carroll County, Maryland his whole life, and is making these comments to be heard at the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearing on February 1st, 2025 in Carroll County. Now, John, when you were growing up, did your family ever talk about lynching?
Yeah, they did. About pretty much everywhere you went throughout my community, people talked about or knew of someone who had been lynched.
What were those conversations like that you heard?
Well, they were like somebody who lived in Baltimore, someone who lived in Catonsville, someone who lived in Frederick was lynched because of this, that, or the other. Then there was the story, don't know how true it was, of my father's brother, who was beat to death and lynched down in Sykesville under that bridge down there that goes across from Carroll into Howard County.
What was it like? I mean, you were born here in Carroll County. What was it like to grow up as a child of color in Carroll County?
Well, it was living in Johnsville wasn't bad. Now that you get old, when you get older and look back on it, it was a close-knit community of Black people. Now, that's not to say that we had everything that the white folks had. An example is when it snowed. Just so happens that I worked on my cousin's farm because I had to plow the dirt road open. I'd walk back over there in the snow if it was waist deep, get the tractor and the drag sled out, and that's what we used to open the road up for people who lived along that road. So it would be 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm out there with that John Deere putt-putting, which most people said they were glad to hear it coming because they knew the road was getting open. Because the state road would not allow the plow to come down our road. Johnsville Road itself, which is now Bartholomew Road, was a hard road for cattle, and they weren't allowed to come down there until all other roads were finished. So overall, living in the community wasn't bad. as long as, how did Hudson put it that time? As long as you stay in your place. But see, staying in your place was a term that one had to reckon with. What does it mean? Where's my place? This too got me into trouble because I started to wonder at a young age, what's my place? So I went home one day and I said to my mother, I was riding a bicycle. And I asked her, I said, what's our place? She said, what are you talking about, boy? And I said, well, I just heard that, you know, we black people had a place and we had to stay in their place. And she said, yeah, that's exactly what you do. I said, well, what am I supposed to do? You're supposed to stay in your, well, that's my question. Where is my place? And she said, black people, when they tell you you aren't allowed to do this and you aren't allowed to do that,
From sort of that period of your life into doing some work for civil rights.
well, see, that's where I was. I used to see, just out of inquisitiveness, that's where civil rights really started. But when it started, I didn't know it was civil rights. But when it started, and I knew that it was said, you can't go in this restaurant. You can't go in that restaurant. You can't go in the Rexall's down in Sykesville. You can't go in the Carroll movie theater in Westminster, and that kind of stuff. So when I got the opportunity to pass one of these places, I just get the notion, what the hell with it? I'm going in and sit down. And I knew them people weren't going to serve me. And I kind of figured I was going to get locked up. So I went in and I sat down. And they come over. What can we help you with? I have a cup of coffee, please. And they get the cup of coffee and bring it over in the cardboard cup and sit it down there with the top on it. Oh, I knew what this meant, but I go, no, I don't want it in a cardboard cup. Why you give it to me in a cardboard cup? And the waitress or the way, all nervous, well, you asked for a cup of coffee? I said, yeah, but I'm gonna drink it here. And they start stuttering and carrying on. I go, oh, I got you now. And then they finally go, we can't serve you there. Why? We just can't serve you here. I said, why? I just want a cup of coffee. Now, by this time, and my crazy tracker record was terrible because I picked, a lot of times when I did these tricks, I picked the time when the place was crowded. And then I look around and go, oh, shit, look at all these people in here. And they looking at me. And I thought, and I said, well, why can't I have a cup of coffee? Because we can't serve you in here, mister. You're not allowed in here. Well, and then all right, if I'm going to get locked up, the hell with it, I'm going to get locked up. And then I go, well, what do you mean you can't serve me in here? I get loud, see, and they didn't want me to get loud. Now, it's against the law. You can't be, we'll have to call the cop. Well, call the cop. I thought to myself, oh God, I hope they don't call the cops. I hear the cops just as bad as these people are. And Anyway, they killed a cow. But most of the time, I would venture to guess to say 90% of the time, the cops would kill them. And they'd say, come on. And I said, where am I going? Don't talk to you a minute. And I said, what, with your gun? No, yeah, you're right. I know how you talk with that gun, and I don't have a gun. I said, okay, I'm coming. I told that, I turned around and go, see, he wants to talk to me. Y'all watch out the window. See what he does. Anyway, I came outside. He said, I'm not going to bother you, but do me a favor. And I said, what's that? He said, look, they don't want you in the restaurant because they don't want to serve black people. He said, do me a favor so I don't have to lock you up. Then you don't have to pay a big fine. Because he said it is against Maryland law. Only white only can eat there. I said, why would anybody make a damn law like that? I said, that doesn't make sense. If you're in business to serve people, you're in business to serve people. I didn't want him to give it to me. I'm going to pay for it. But he said, look, the law is the law. And if you want to change the law, you got to go to Congress. I said, okay. He said, but just do me a favor. You didn't call me. I said, okay. Since you were nice about it, I'll do that for you. And I did. I left. But then I'd get to another one later on, somewhere down the road, and I'd go and do the same thing all over. Just to see how many times that they would throw me out. And they did. And each time it just buried itself in my soul that things weren't right. Things shouldn't be this way. You know, and we've got to live together. We've got to learn how to hold hands. And we've got to learn how to use our hearts instead of our crazy minds that lead us to nothing but battle. And it's not just America, it seems to be all over this world. So if man doesn't seem to be able to solve it, his record is terrible. Instead of us solving the problems and making it worse, or getting to the point where we love one another, where we need one another, except in the time of catastrophes, we wind up fighting each other over that catastrophe. That little piece of grassland over there with a little creek running beside it belongs to that state. No, it belongs to us. And then the next thing you know, we've got an all-out battle over that little creek with that little bit of water in it. But there's enough water in that creek so we can both use it. So why don't we both use the water out of that creek? We both can solve our thirst. We both can take part in what God has given us. And that's why he gave us this creek. Do you know of any man that makes creeks? No, you don't. Because even if we made the creek, we'd turn around and we'd spoil it. So in order to get things on one accord, the word I believe is called LOB. You got to love one another. You got to come together. You got to unify.
Thank you, Dr. Zabardino, for the introductions to the late Mr. Dorsey and to Mr. Lewis, and our gratitude to them both for the stories that they shared with us. This shows the importance of creating these spaces where the elders can give us their wisdom, because they got a lot to say. And all they're asking us to do, listen. So at this time, I'd like to recognize Kevin Dayhoff, who is a member of the Westminster City Council and a former mayor of Westminster. And he comes to us today as a descendant of Carroll County. Thank you, Mr. Dayhoff.
I'm not going to sing like my friend Dr. Dorsey. When Dr. Kuhn said something to me about making a presentation today, he said I had 8 minutes. And I complained that folks are going to want to listen to me for 8 minutes. But when I wrote the first draft of this, since I've written about 100 articles on civil rights in Carroll County, I think the first draft was about an hour and a half. I broke it down to 9 minutes and 51 seconds. In addition to the Westminster Mayor, Mona Becker, I want to recognize Rodney Morris, the president of the Carroll County NAACP. Raise your hand, Rodney. I always like being around Rodney. He's a retired Maryland State Trooper. He always looks after me. And I also want to recognize the president of McDaniel College, Julia Jaskins. I think it's a real tribute to our community that folks like this, like the mayor, come out and participate and support events like this. So good morning. My name is Kevin Dayhoff. I'm a writer, artist, and historian. My family, the Wrights, and the Warfields have lived in the Carroll County area since the 1600s. I've written for the Baltimore Sun. In full disclosure, I've written for the Baltimore Sun for 20 years. And I served in the civil rights movement in the South, in North Carolina and South Carolina, from 1971 to 1973. I'd like to share with you a little bit of context of why it's important that we now study the horrific murder of an African-American gentleman by the name of Townsend Cook on June 2nd, 1885. On June 2nd, 1885, Mr. Cook was abducted from the Carroll County Jail and dragged to a large oak tree just south of Westminster, where he was tortured, shot, and hung. The Maryland Lynching Memorial Committee reports that 38 African-American victims of racial terror were lynched in Maryland between 1854 and 1950. I would like to thank the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission in partnership with the Carroll County Lynching Memorial Project for the opportunity for us to gather here today to reflect upon how this racial terror lynching still influences our community over 140 years later. In order for us to heal as a community, it is important for us to understand our history and shine a light on the dark legacy of the racial terror murder of Mr. Cook in 1885. And then we need to talk about it. Acknowledging the wrongs of the past gives us an opportunity to create a better future. Fortunately, in recent years, efforts have been made to come to terms with dark moments of our past in order for us to try and understand how that dark past affects us today. In April 2018, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the first lynching memorial in the United States, was opened in Montgomery, Alabama. In December of that same year, the United States Senate unanimously passed a bill that defined lynching as a federal crime. That was in April of 2018. I'm not sure what the hurry was. The first planning meeting for the Carroll County Lynching Memorial Project took place in a small meeting room at the Westminster branch of the Carroll County Public Library on September 12th, 2019. There were 5 organizers present at that meeting: Reverend Erin Snell, Jean Lewis, John Lewis's wife, Dr. Pam Zappardino, myself, and Russell Dick. It was in April 2019 that the state of Maryland established the Truth Commission to investigate the lynchings of at least 38 African Americans between 1854 and 1933. On February 15th, 2020, the Carroll County Lynching Memorial Project held its first public meeting to discuss efforts to acknowledge the history of racial terrorism. 56 members of the community attended. We conducted a memorial service at the historic Carroll County General on June 2nd, 2021. On August the 13th, 2024, a soil collection ceremony took place where Mr. Cook was killed on June 2nd, 1885. Dr. Roxana Harlow, who's with us today, Dr. Pam Zappardino, my friend Carroll County Sheriff Jim DeWeese, Jesse Harrington, and this writer participated in that soil collection. On September 8th, 2024, we held a memorial service to fill several ceremonial jars with the soil that we had recently collected at the site where Mr. Cook was killed. We filled the jars for the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project, and the Carroll County Lynching Memorial Project. In November of 2024, my wife and I traveled to Montgomery, Alabama, and personally hand-delivered the Townsend Cook soil collection to the Equal Justice Initiative Senior Project Manager Jennifer Harris. The Townsend Cook soil collection jar now is included in the collection of over 800 soil collection jars on display at the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. On the EJI website, EJI Director Brian Stevenson helps us to understand the significance of the soil collection when he said, "In this soil, there is the sweat of the enslaved. In the soil, there is the blood of victims of racial violence and lynching. There are tears in the soil from all those who labored under the indignation and humiliation of segregation. But in the soil, there is also the opportunity for a new life, a chance to grow something hopeful and healing for the future." So for additional historical context into our Carroll County history, it is believed that my family, the Wrights, and the Warfield family first came to central Maryland from Ireland and England in the 1600s. In the 1700s, they migrated to southern Carroll County. My mom, Louise Wright, was the daughter of William Earl Wright. According to oral tradition, the Wrights were Quakers that taught at the Friends Quaker School in Union Bridge. It is understood that two of my ancestors, Joseph and Isaac Wright, signed the abolitionist anti-slavery accords at the Pipe Creek Meeting House on December the 6th, 1826. My grandfather, William Earl Wright, was born in 1895, 10 years after Mr. Cook was murdered. Mom moved to Westminster in the late 1940s. For much of my earliest childhood, my mom was a single mom. And as a result, I spent a great deal of time at my grandfather's farm in Taylorsville. On a number of occasions when we traveled south on Route 27 to the family farm, I asked about the quarries just below Spring Mill Station. Mom always shook her head and responded that something terrible had happened there. I later figured out that that was where Mr. Cook was murdered. All these years, the murder of Mr. Cook remains a burden on our community, and it is about time that we talked about it. It is a stain on our history, a burden that can only be lifted by being brought out into the open and into the light of day. Jonathan Pitts, writing for the Baltimore Sun on September 30th, 2018, explained this about the lynchings. The underlying complaint against the victim were often flimsy allegations. Too often, the lynchings had a carnival atmosphere. It was certain that the victim would never enjoy their right to due process, and none of the perpetrators of the crime would be held responsible. Civil rights attorney Cheryl Eiffel, the author of the 2007 book On the Courthouse Lawn, Confronting the Legacy of Lynching in the 21st Century, reports that one misconception about lynchings is that they were mostly the work of marginalized or disaffected individuals. In fact, widely respected citizens, teachers, ministers, and housewives regularly took part. On a side note, the first member of the Ku Klux Klan that I had an awkward interaction with in the South was the co-pastor of the United Methodist Church that I had attended the Sunday before. He had a shotgun at the time. A lynching is more than a murder. It's a message crime. It's a message to the African American community about the boundaries of citizenship. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. There will be consequences if you cross these lines. These are the narrow confines of the ways in which you will be permitted to exercise citizenship. My friend Dr. Creary of the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey further explains, to understand the problems we're facing today, we need to go back 100 years to see how these attitudes developed and in what ways they're still at work. Dr. Harlow, a co-leader of the Carroll County Lynching Memorial Project, expressed hope at the June 2nd, 2021 memorial service that calling the public's attention to the abduction and subsequent murder of Mr. Cook and memorializing the events of 1885 will help to inspire cross-racial conversations around racial reconciliation and equity. Reverend Snell, my friend Reverend Snell, remarked at the end of the program that none of us are well or whole when some of us are harmed. Thank you. Mr. Chair, do you want me to be available for questions?
Sure. Any questions from members of the commission at this time?
Stump the historian. And I'll be available throughout the hearing if anyone has any particular questions. I've been piqued by your history, really piqued me, because my grandfather was at Fort Meade. I've always wondered if my grandfather knew Mr. Henry, who owned the farm, or knew that much about, because my grandfather was always very circumspect about talking about it. It was always very upsetting for him. But any other questions? Thank you. It's a real honor and a privilege to be here today. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Dayhoff, for your testimony. And thank you to those whose testimony that we have received so far this morning. So at this time, we will take about a 20-minute break. As a reminder, Ms. Shawnisha, Ms. Caitlin from Living and Growing are here. If you want to be in space with them to process anything that you have listened to so far this morning, again, we'll come back in about 20 minutes and we will continue with our hearing. Thank you.
I know. Don't jinx it. Come on.
No, I know. I'm just saying, just brace for.
probably, I think, after we got the grant to get somebody to actually do it.
right, welcome back, everyone. We will be getting started in a few minutes. If you can start to make your way back to your seats, we will proceed with the rest of the hearing. Thank you. All right, welcome back. So before we, get started with the rest of the hearing, I would like to acknowledge one of our commissioners, Dr. Iris Barnes, who was joining us online. So Iris, if you see this, my bad. Glad you're here. As we now begin the portion of the hearing that focuses on expert witness testimony, I do want to provide an update on the timeline of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So as I shared at the beginning of this morning, this is our final regional hearing that is happening. And in about 2 months, on April 4th and 5th, at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum in Baltimore City, we will be having our institutional hearing. And that will be an opportunity for the commission, along with various experts around the work of restorative justice, to talk about the factors and the forces that allowed for the legacy of racial terror lynching to exist, and to discuss the appropriate remedies for justice and for healing. And yes, that does include reparations. And so we will be having that collection of discussions again on April 4th and 5th. Reginald F. Lewis Museum in Baltimore City. More information to come. Please just stay in contact with us. You can check out the website for the MLTRC. That's the best way to remain connected with our progress. And then after that institutional hearing in April, we will be working towards our final report in December 2025, when it is due to the Maryland General Assembly. And then between that time and June 30th, 2026, which is the official sunset of the MLTRC, we will be working in a role of advocacy, speaking with policymakers, people with resources, community members, to help manifest the recommendations and the calls for action that come out of this work, as well as the final report, which will synthesize and share all of that. So during this portion of the hearing where we focus on expert witnesses, we acknowledge that there are some with whom we have reached out that did not feel comfortable being in this space. That is not unusual. It has happened in other regions of this state where people have had to weigh very real consequences and very real implications of speaking in this space, telling the truth of the impact and legacy of racial terror lynchings that exist within their communities. And so we honor those people, we honor their courage, we honor their bravery, we respect their decision, we understand it, and we hope that this serves as a moment for people to acknowledge how real this is, and to acknowledge how critically important it is for the truth to get out there and to support those who are telling the truth, to support those who are courageous enough to share what needs to be shared. So we are grateful that these moments have been captured by the illustrious event stream team, so that people, not just in this physical space, but anywhere they may be, can be a part of this moment. And to those members of the media who are telling this story for us as well, we appreciate you. So at this time, I would like to recognize Dr. Bryn Upton. Dr. Upton is a professor of history at McDaniel College, where he teaches courses in intellectual history, African American history, women's history, and modern U.S. history. Thank you, Dr. Upton.
Thank you. I would like to try to provide a little bit of broader contextual history for this moment, and also for better understanding the power dynamics that are at play when we talk about lynching and we talk about racialized lynching in America specifically. From the start of our nation, we were divided ideologically between those who believed in the promise of the Declaration of Independence, that we are created equal and all have basic rights to humanity, and those who believe that some people are better than others, and that the rights of humanity and citizenship should only go to the few. This division manifests itself in several ways. The enshrining of human enslavement into the Constitution awarded enhanced voting representation to the white people who lived in slaveholding states. Fugitive slave laws made those who lived in free states complicit in the institution of enslavement, and in that way the United States was both a slave nation and a nation with slaves. By the 1850s, the division in America became irreconcilable. Bleeding Kansas, Anthony Burns, Harper's Ferry, people were willing to take up arms to fight for their version of America. At the decade's end, John Brown was hanged for trying to start a war to bring about the end of slavery. That war would come and consume the nation less than 2 years later. The Civil War was a time of trials that raised the deepest questions of national meaning, spilling blood over the very meaning of freedom. The war's end and victory of the principles of democracy and equality over white supremacy brought a chance for what Lincoln called at Gettysburg a new birth of freedom. But over the next decade, the struggle of 4 million souls released from the bonds of human enslavement, working to create sustainable lives for themselves, ran up against the old forces of supremacy. Reconstruction became more about economic reunion for the nation than about human rights. Black participation in Southern politics was a revolutionary change, but it was only part of the change brought about by emancipation. Deviations from specific traditions governing everyday racial interactions started to anger and frighten white people, mostly in the South, but actually across the nation. The organization of political terrorist groups also made it extremely difficult to enforce civil rights laws. Groups such as the Knights of the White Camellia, the Palefaces, and most notoriously the Ku Klux Klan, which was formed by Confederate veterans in 1866. These groups attempted to impose social, economic, and political control over formerly enslaved people and their allies through intimidating voters and enforcing Southern racial hierarchies. Although the Klan drew its foot soldiers from the ranks of poor white Southerners, the Southern planter aristocracy, the powered people of communities, also encouraged, condoned, and sometimes controlled their actions. Violence was not randomly directed. It was political terrorism designed to restore white supremacy. The tactics ran the gamut from individual beatings and whippings to massacres. Though some historians have speculated that blacks were unwilling or unable to defend themselves, there is strong evidence to the contrary. Suggestions of general black acquiescence to intimidation made its way into textbooks and popular history. That was more propaganda than reality. Those who resisted were likely to pay a heavy price. Black judges issued arrest warrants, and black sheriffs jailed white terrorists. Confrontations between black soldiers or returning veterans and whites were common. Black troops actually arrested the white chief of police in Wilmington, North Carolina, when he refused to surrender his weapons as ordered. Black soldiers in Victoria, Texas, retaliated for the murder of a black civilian by lynching the white killer. And black soldiers in South Carolina shot a Confederate veteran who had stabbed a black sergeant for refusing to leave a railroad car in which white women were seated. Many black veterans retained their military weapons, and some formed militia units to protect their communities. Freedmen did not submit meekly to Klan violence. A political compromise in the winter of 1877 brought Rutherford B. Hayes into the White House in return for business and government investment in the South, the withdrawal of most of the occupying troops, and a tacit understanding that Southern black people would be left to the mercy of white Southern political leaders. This entente between political parties led to the disarming of local black militias and the reassertion of white control over black labor, essentially ending black political influence in most states of the Union. The Supreme Court decisions in a series of cases from 1873 to 1883 removed federal protection from almost all black civil rights, striking down essentially the Civil Rights Act of 1875 and thwarting effectively the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, leaving the responsibility for protecting black civil rights to the states, which allowed terrorists free rein as several states refused to recognize black civil rights or citizenship, bringing the promise of Reconstruction to an end. W.E.B. Du Bois called Reconstruction an unfinished revolution from feudalism to industrial democracy, and predicted that the problem of the following century would be the problem of the color line. Writing anonymously in 1885 in a New York newspaper, one black Kentuckian stated, "We cannot stand it any longer. We should kill as well as be killed." But black people across the country understood the impracticality of armed confrontation with whites and the dwindling prospects for justice. Lynchings were on the rise, not merely in the former Confederate territories, but across the nation. Black citizens found themselves under near constant threat. Any perceived violation of social mores, any attempt at economic independence, any assertion of political will could subject any black person to the threat of political and physical violence. This was the world of Townsend Cook, white terrorists trying to enforce the social stratification of the pre-war South, using violence as one of their strongest tools. One of the great myths that we have been taught is the notion that what people were asking for was separate but equal. That was never what they really meant. Because separation was never comfortable. When white people tried to separate black and white, and black people began to prosper, that was almost inevitably followed with white political and economic violence and terror. We all understand the Tulsa riots come back around. What was so devastating was that it proved that it was never about separate, it was never about equal. It was about just enough separation to maintain oppression, and never about equality. And so when we think back to the time of Townsend Cook's lynching, we want to understand this in terms of power and the meaning of power. And when we think about what we might owe ourselves as we try to create some sort of reconciliation for this, we want to keep in mind the extraordinary power play that is part of the message of lynching, and that is to maintain not anything about an individual, but to maintain a system of social stratification, a system of economic stratification, and a system of white supremacy.
Thank you, Dr. Upton. To the commissioners, any questions or comments on Dr. Upton's testimony? Thank you again. So at this time, I would like to recognize Dr. Roxana Harlow. Dr. Harlow is one of the co-chairs of the Carroll County Lynching Memorial Project and serves as the discipline coordinator of sociology and faculty coordinator of diversity training and development at Carroll Community College, where she is also a professor. Thank you, Dr. Harlow.
All right, I'm trying to see how to best position this mic, maybe like that. All right, can everyone hear me? Okay. All right, the false and harmful stereotype that people who are defined as black are more violent, immoral, lazy, and less intelligent, that is, less human, than people who are defined as white, has long been used to justify discriminatory and inhumane treatment and the violation of civil and human rights. That's what made it possible in June of 1885 for a mob of Carroll County residents, considered men of respectability, to openly torture and murder Townsend Cook without fear of public objection, sanction, or prosecution of any kind for that horrific and illegal, not to mention immoral, act. It's not just Townsend Cook and his family who were terrorized by the lynching. The message to stay in your place because we can do whatever we want to you, whenever we want to you, and for whatever reason we want to, was intended for the entire black community, as we heard from Mr. John Lewis in his interview. And it's not just those who actively participated in this lynching who were responsible. This message was also sent by the white residents of Carroll County, who gave tacit approval for this terrorism through their silence. But this is 2025, right? This is not 1885, and times have changed since then. It's now an easy lift, right, for Carroll County to decry a lynching from which we are now 140 years removed. What's proving much harder is for the county to own its history, warts and all, acknowledge the harm done, including roughly a century of codified segregation and discrimination after enslavement, and be willing to dig down and expose the very deep and sensitive roots of racism and prejudice that still endure today. Now, people understandably get defensive when these issues hit closer to home and closer in time. Some still hold tight to those old justifications and rationalizations. Some venerate the Confederacy still here. Even more common, though, is that those old but ubiquitous stereotypes about Black people being inferior are buried deep in our subconscious. And for some people, it's actually in their conscious minds, too, as well as their subconscious minds. And this is why there's a profound need for truth and reconciliation here in this county. I won't take up time sharing examples of the ways that I have personally experienced this type of race-based prejudice and discrimination, disrespect, and dismissal in Carroll County since I moved here about 25 years ago. There's a particular way that disrespect is done when it's done Southern old school. There's a particular way that people who were raised during a time of their that legalized racial hierarchy, there's a particular way that they have practice at communicating this, and that they are explicit in their beliefs, and they have communicated with me when it has happened in ways that it's very clear they're letting me know that I have violated some unknown to me racial social norm and racial social hierarchy. But I won't get into my personal experiences. Instead, I'll mention just a few examples that point to broader social patterns that are problematic, and not about any one individual, not about any one bad actor, but about institutional patterns of race and ethnic-based prejudice that is part of the culture here and probably unconscious to most people. So I saw it in the fear of the other embedded in the rationale for our county's adoption of English as the official language ordinance in 2012. I saw it in 2017 when a group of my students laughed as they argued that we should bring lynching back. I saw it again several years ago after a spate of crime in Baltimore. Schools here were told to cancel all trips to the city because it was too dangerous. This despite the fact that there was no evidence to suggest that school groups going to museums and the zoo during the school day might be targets. I see it when students associate Baltimore Blackness bad, despite never having been there. They talk about Baltimore like it's in a whole different country that they shouldn't travel to. There's been some travel warning that they may be set upon by the natives. Interestingly, I had a student who told me that his church had done some service work in Baltimore and how nervous he was going down there. And then he said, but you know, I realized when I got there, everything went great, and they're just people. They're just people. Imagine, right? I saw these prejudices again when most of our school board objected to the idea of recruiting a more racially and ethnically diverse teaching and administrative staff. Their argument was that we should focus on hiring the most qualified people. The unspoken assumption is that recruiting people who are not defined as white necessarily means hiring the unqualified. I saw it during a conference when a Carroll County Public School alum explained that she was ill-prepared for the diversity of people she had encountered when she went to college. She had not been prepared for that in our public schools. And I see it when my students of color share the racial and ethnic-based taunts that they've endured throughout school, and when almost every student in my class raised their hand when I asked if they regularly heard the N-word used as a taunt in school. And I could go on. But this isn't about any one person or claims of goodness or badness or who is good and who is bad. My point is that the same belief of white supremacy and Black inferiority that made lynching socially acceptable 140 years ago is still with us today. Not in the exact same way, not in the exact same form, but there is still a deep and often unconscious social and psychological investment in the idea that groups who are not defined as white are less than. It's the only way to make peace with and justify ongoing inequality, prejudice, and the instinct to want to stay separated from those people. And there are still active efforts to keep those people out of the county, whether they be Black or other people of color. Therefore, I believe repair starts with Carroll County acknowledging its past and the harm of that past, not just harm to Townsend Cook and his family, but to the Black population who've lived here for generations and have had to live with the cumulative effects of that harm as they force their way through social and psychological barriers. And harm has also been done to the county as a whole. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Reparation and reconciliation isn't just for those upon whom harm is committed. It's about repair. We still have a deep social rift, an old wound that refuses to heal because we prefer to ignore it and pretend it's not there. So the repair, the healing, is for the community, not just for one group. It's not just about those people, it's about all of us. Just like in any relationship, when somebody is harmed, if the county is to thrive, we have to acknowledge the wrongs of the past in addition to the rights so that we can address them, that we can learn from them, and we can start to heal. We should work to repair the wrongs while also looking to the future by embracing the increasingly diverse group of people who are coming here, instead of fearing it. A diversity of people, talents, knowledge, perspectives is good for the well-being of the county if it is supported. Our civic and religious organizations will have more opportunities to thrive, as will our economy. Now is the time to seek truth and repair and make a commitment to what is right, just, and humane for the benefit of everyone. And so I leave you with this quote from the Indigenous Australian artist and activist Lila Watson. "If you are here to help me, then you are wasting your time. But if you come because your liberation is bound up in mine, then let us begin."
Thank you, Dr. Harlow. I must quickly say I'm very appreciative and understanding of the role that researchers and academics play in this work. So I would be remiss if I didn't give my own appreciation to you all, as well as to Dr. Julia Jaskin, president of McDaniel College, who has joined us today. Thank you for bearing witness to this moment. So at this time, I'd like to recognize once again Dr. Pam Zappardino.
Thank you. I'm back. At the last minute, what I was going to talk about sort of changed. Do we have any high school students here with us today? Any college students? Yay! I saw a McDaniel sweatshirt. Are you mostly from McDaniel, or? Oh, I'm very proud of you. I was hoping also to see some high school students, maybe even middle school students, because we ran across something very interesting as we were putting together people that we thought would be good speakers for today's hearing. And one of the things we were concerned about is the fact that we don't teach very much about the racial history of our country, of our state, of our county in our schools. I teach at McDaniel College. Lately, I've been teaching mostly first-year students, and I teach a course called Take It to the Streets, Nonviolent Protest. And it's a course that brings students into the idea that there are going to be disagreements, there are going to be people that don't want to come together, and that there are nonviolent ways that are much more productive to address that. And when I ask my first-year students what they know about nonviolence, what they know about civil rights and that movement in this country, I get complete silence. They don't know anything. And I don't mind starting from scratch, but it worries me that our schools don't seem to be, and my students aren't just from Carroll County, they're from all over the country. We don't seem to be teaching our young people about that part of our history. We seem to be too embarrassed by it. We don't want to deal with the questions. There are lots of reasons, but what we're doing is depriving several generations of knowing who we are as a country and helping us to figure out how we do reconciliation. Because they're getting the same kinds of, what's the best word for it? The same kinds of messages that really don't tell them anything, that we hear a lot. That tends to lead to repetition of beliefs. And that repetition of beliefs is problematic. All you needed to do was watch TV over the past few days, where a plane crash was blamed on the hiring of people of color and people with disabilities. That our students probably heard. But in our schools, they don't get much discussion about why is it that white people and people of color have this chasm between them. It really becomes so bad that we had hoped to have a public school teacher standing here talking about this issue. We could not find one willing to come here. They all disagreed, or they all agreed rather, with the purpose of this hearing. They all agreed that we are failing our students by not talking about these issues, but they were all too frightened to come here and talk about the issue of education and lynching and Jim Crow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were certain that if they came, they would no longer be employed. And that seems to be happening at the national level as well. And so I think we need to begin to question when we're going to grow up. When are we going to grow up and acknowledge what we've done in the past? We can't change that, but we can stop ourselves from repeating it. But we need to stop being afraid. And I understand the teacher's perspective. But as a nation, as a people, we need to stop being afraid. And we ask both white teachers and teachers of color. Teachers of color, I think, had much more to lose, but both said equally, we can't do that. We'll get in trouble. And, I think we ought to put some signs up in our public schools that quote John Lewis saying, "Get in good trouble." There are a lot of people who have gotten in trouble fighting for civil rights, people of every color. We've had people from Mexico and South America. We've had people from Brooklyn and, the places that you would think, oh, those people are too wealthy, they don't care. But in many cases, they have come out. But we need to stop being afraid of talking about what has happened. I really worry. I ask my students, how many of you in a week look at anything that has to do with current events in the world, in the country? Usually 100% say none. And that's another way. I think we've taught our children, and they're not children anymore, that stay away from all those current events. A lot of my students say it makes me feel bad. If it makes you feel bad, it's time to do something. And I say that to all of us here, because a lot of us avoid these issues because it makes us feel bad. It makes us feel guilty. And guilt doesn't do anything but make you sit in a room and feel bad. It's time that we all start thinking about how do we resolve this? And we can't put it all on, I have a black friend. And we can't put it all on that one black friend or 5 black friends or a class full of students of color. We need to put ourselves in that mix, and we need to listen, and we need to understand and recognize that, white people need to fix themselves. We can't expect people of color to do it all for us. We have a responsibility. We may not have been at the lynching of Townsend Cook or at anybody's lynching, and we may try to do everything we can to be equitable. But those words are handy. We need in our heart to know we need to do something. And I think this hearing is a wonderful start. I know when we started this work several years ago, most people in Carroll County had no clue anyone had been lynched here. And sort of thought, well, we're above that. Well, we're not, as we found out. So I want to leave you recognizing that not only do we have to come to grips with this ourselves, we need to help people younger than we are, certainly younger than me. I'm not going to speak for everybody in the room, but I'm getting up there. But we need to help students understand what our history was. One of my students asked me this past fall, what is going on in Florida and these other states with teachers? I mean, why are they so afraid and they say they can't talk about some things? And I thought back, it was toward the end of class, and I thought back on what we had talked about in class. And I said, well, I'll give you one example. I said, in many states in this country today, if I talked about everything I talked about in this class, I could get arrested. And as long as we're willing to talk, to arrest people who talk about things that make us uncomfortable, we're making no progress. And please, if you're going to watch the news, which I do way too much, question a lot of what you hear, because I can guarantee you that the problem in our country is not DEI. It goes to a very different level than that. And ask questions. If your students, ask your professors, ask your teachers, ask your family, why is this happening? We have to talk.
Thank you again, Dr. Zappardino. So at this time, I would like to recognize Dr. Richard Smith. Dr. Smith is the Associate Provost for Equity and Belonging at McDaniel College, where he is also a professor of sociology. Thank you for being here.
But I did feel that this was necessary to be at. So I'm here today. I don't want you to get scared, that's why I brought my mask, okay? I want to begin by thanking the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Office of the Maryland Attorney General for inviting me to speak at this public hearing, a gathering of truth seekers and justice bearers. It is both a solemn duty and a profound honor to stand here today in memory of Townsend Cook, who was brutally lynched in Carroll County in 1885. His name, like so many others, has too often been buried beneath the weight of silence. But today, we bring his story into the light. Today, we reckon with history, not to dwell in despair, but to pave the way for reconciliation, healing, and justice. I have been given the assignment and the responsibility to share recommendations for reconciliation and to address the ongoing impacts of racism in Carroll County. To do so, we must first begin where all true reconciliation begins, with truth. Truth is the foundation of healing. As I reviewed the historical records and details of the lynching that occurred nearly 140 years ago, I could not help but reflect on a principle that many of us were taught as children: tell the truth. Yet history reminds us that truth was not sought after in the terror lynching of Townsend Cook, nor in the countless other acts of racial violence that have stained the soil of Maryland and this nation. Truth was inconvenient then. Truth remains inconvenient now. For too long, those in positions of power have replaced truth with fear, with hatred, and with a relentless preservation of white supremacy. The brutal reality is that this system was not built to uphold truth, but to uphold control. The same forces that allowed lynch mobs to act with impunity are present today in the form of systemic injustice, racial disparities, and the continued suppression of voices that challenge the status quo. But truth is the beginning of transformation. Without truth, there is no reconciliation, only avoidance. Without truth, there is no healing, only open wounds that deepen our generation over generations. So what must we do? We must confront the truth. We must tell the truth. We must teach the truth. Even as we gather here today in a county rich with history and beauty, we cannot ignore that racism did not end with the last recorded lynching. The ideology that justified lynching still finds new expressions today. Sometimes in the blatant hate of white nationalist groups, sometimes in the quiet exclusion of communities of color from economic opportunities, and sometimes in the rewriting of history to make the uncomfortable more palatable. In Carroll County, we see this reality in the presence of so-called patriot and liberty groups that cloak their divisive, exclusionary, and racist ideologies in the language of freedom. We see it in the experiences of Black and brown families who still navigate spaces where they are not fully welcome. We see it in the disparities in education, healthcare, housing, and criminal justice outcomes. The past is not past. It is woven into our present. And so, if we are serious about reconciliation, we must be just as serious about dismantling the structures of racism that still persist today. So here are some recommendations from my humble opinion. We must, number one, continue to use education as a tool for truth and healing. We must commit to telling the full and unvarnished history of Carroll County, including its participation in racial violence. Public schools, museums, historical societies must continue to uplift these stories, not erase them. We need mandated curricula that include local Black history, the history of lynching, and the broader truth of systemic racism. As we've heard many times before, knowledge is power, and ignorance only serves to perpetuate the harm. Number two, memorialization, as we're doing today, in public acknowledgement. This may have already been done. I may not have knowledge of this, but Townsend Cook deserves more than a footnote in history. His life, murder, and his dignity must be honored in an even more permanent and public way. This could include memorials, continual memorial, an annual day of remembrance, continual official proclamations acknowledging the county's history of racial terror. And if a place can remember its generals, its founders, its victories, and its so-called heroes, it must also remember its victims. Number three, policy and structural change. Reconciliation is not just about remembering, it's about repairing. This means confronting the systemic barriers that have left Black and brown communities disproportionately under-resourced and underrepresented. It means ensuring economic opportunities, access to fair housing, and protection from racial discrimination. It means police accountability and legal justice reform. Words of reconciliation without policies of restoration are empty. Number 4, community-led truth and reconciliation initiatives. Healing cannot come from institutions alone. It must come from within the community. We need more convening spaces where honest conversations can happen between Black and white residents of Carroll County. We need local truth commissions, community dialogues, and accountability efforts to address both past and present injustices. Reconciliation is not a destination, it's a journey. It's hard, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. We do not gather here today simply to look back at history. We gather to make a choice about our future. Will we continue to let silence, avoidance, or political demagogues dictate the path forward? Or will we be bold enough to face the truth, speak the truth, and build a county and a country where justice is not an aspiration, but finally a reality? Townsend Cook's life was stolen, but his story must not be forgotten. His name must not disappear into the shadows of history. Let us continue to honor him not only with words, but more importantly, with action. Let's commit not only to remembrance, but to change. While so many are trying right now to take us backwards, we know that justice and truth always moves forward. We must continue the path and keep moving forward because we know that truth must and it will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. At this time, I would like to recognize Mr. Clyde Johnson. Mr. Johnson serves as the Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Ooh, that's a scary word, I'm sorry. It's like we were talking about, like, if we had the power to drop planes from the sky, like, would we waste our time with that? Anyway. The Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Carroll Community College, Mr. Clyde Johnson. Thank you for being here.
I do hope I'm not scary. It is my painful honor to be here today. And I say painful because this is not a pleasant subject. But I am glad to be here with my colleagues and friends who are doing this type of work, and for all of you who are here to listen, to learn, and hopefully to do the good work. Dr. King reused and paraphrased William Cowper's poem that started off like this: fleecy locks and black complexion cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skin may differ, but affection dwells in black and white the same. Were I so tall as to reach the sky or grasp the ocean at its span, I must be measured by my soul, for it's the mind that sets the standard for the man. For so long, the true measure of a man was not by our intelligence, not by what we had to offer. We as black people were measured by our skin color. We were not allowed the dignity of being viewed as human during the transatlantic slave trade. Mr. Townsend Cook and others were not allowed the dignity to be seen and treated as human. Definitely not the night which he was taken away was he treated in any humane manner in which some resolution hopefully could have come out of whatever the issue was that we really may not ever know. History has laid out unjust laws, substandard housing, outdated educational materials as ways to continue the legacy of mistreatment of brown-skinned people. Although I'm a native of North Carolina, Our experiences are not so different in the Deep South as they are in Maryland, which I grew up thinking that this was the North and something special, but not knowing that we have so much of the same history. My 90-year-old father, the Reverend Clyde Johnson, was a student at Shaw University and was arrested in the sit-ins during the Civil Rights era. He was also arrested later for many acts of resistance, and there's this story that someone told me that Dad was trying to integrate the whites-only laundromat in Weldon, North Carolina. When the police arrived, they said, "Don't you know that this is for whites only?" To which Dad responded, "Yes, that's why I'm only washing white shirts." My mother, the 82-year-old Mary Alice Johnson, attended the Septima Clark Citizenship School, where they taught literacy and political education so that she could go back to Weldon and Roanoke Rapids to teach other Black people how to get ready to vote. They were both terrorized during the Civil Rights era, but their strength and determination has been passed on to me. With the stroke of a pen, the President of the United States created psychological terror lynching this past week. Across all of our federal agencies, he said DEI must stop. And with that, he also said later, of course, as we said, that we have the power to make planes fall from the sky without merit, without any reason. And will he ever sing our praises for the contributions in which we have brought to the United States? And for those of us who are chief diversity officers and DEI workers, the question is, will we even have a job in a week or a month or a year from now? Lynching has a profound effect. It's not just the physical lynching, but it's all types of lynching. And lynching has these effects: psychological, social, cultural. It leaves behind a lot of damage. Psychological trauma for those of us who were there and witnessed lynchings, walked away with fear, with grief, with anger, a deep sense of insecurity. And they taught that insecurity to their children, and they taught that insecurity to their children, and so on and so on. And we must break the spell of psychological trauma. Broken trust. Do we trust white people? That's hard to sit and look at my white friends and say, do I trust you? Getting my job here in Carroll County was a question of, do I even trust you to come and to work? When I'm driving back home to Baltimore and a policeman is behind me, do I trust that I can get home safely? We have broken trust. Social division. I live in one neighborhood, you live in another. Our two paths don't cross. Our churches are the most segregated on Sunday mornings. Economic consequences. We stay in our areas, you stay in yours, and whose resources we don't share. All this damage, collateral damage. The cultural damage of not being able to share who we are with each other. There's so much, but we know that healing can occur. Resolution and healing looks a couple of ways: accountability and justice. So forums like this is just one way to begin the process to healing. Truth and reconciliation, truth commissions are much needed. Community empowerment. And empowerment comes in many different forms, and economic empowerment is one of those. But we know that there must be education. Diversity and cultural education must continue. There is no choice. And so when we see the fact that they are trying to remove history out of the classrooms, that's just not any way that we can continue. And mental health and healing needs to happen. In summary, the impact of lynching on our communities is immense, it's multifaceted, but resolutions can be achieved through the combination of justice, education, reconciliation, and empowerment. The key to addressing both the immediate and underlying issues is to build more of a just and equitable society. voting really does matter. We shall overcome.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your testimony, and thank you to all those expert witnesses who shared their wisdom with us in this moment. So at this time, we will now prepare ourselves for the final phase of this hearing, which is the space for public comment. So at this time, I will once again recognize Commissioner Amy Millen, who is the chair of our Logistics Committee, who will read the public comments that have been submitted via email and during the course of this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to reread sort of our framing of how the next 30 minutes or so will go. This is a reminder that comments and questions may be provided via email to mltrc@maryland.gov, on paper provided at the back of the room from Ms. Yep, she's waving her hand. And also by coming forward and speaking at the microphone at the podium. When you do so, please provide your name and your organizational affiliation, if any, and limit your comment or question to no more than 2 minutes. Questions and comments must be limited to the topic or discussion for today's hearing. If your comment or question is off topic, it will not be included in the hearing. Comments and questions should be presented with decorum and the respect appropriate for conducting this public hearing. Any comments or questions containing obscene language or language inciting imminent violence will not be addressed. Finally, a reminder that members of the media may be present during today's hearing, and as such, public comments and questions may be broadcast or printed by news outlets. At this time, there have been no questions or comments provided online, nor have I collected any during the course of the hearing. So if you have a question or comment, or even a recommendation, I invite you to come forward to the podium and share.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jordan Grant. I'm a social work major at McDaniel College. And I'm also an intern at Gateway Crossroads, and this is my classmate.
Hello, my name is Mackenzie. I'm also a social work senior at McDaniel, and my field placement is at the Boys and Girls Club.
Yep. And we just wanted to get up here to tell everyone that we appreciate coming here today and learning about our history, and think it's important to keep talking about our past racial lynchings and teaching this history to our youth as well. I think is very important. And it's the first day of Black History Month, so this is a good way to start that off as well with a whole bunch of learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. May I invite the next person?
Hi, kids. So my name is Will Schwartz. I'm the immediate past president of the Maryland Lynching Memorial Project. That's actually just a few days. But first of all, I wanted to just congratulate the commission on reaching this incredible milestone. All the boxes have been checked, right? And I'll remind you that your work is not done. So you don't want to drop the ball before you cross the goal line. Well, I'm just saying. So, but I also really wanted to congratulate the coalition, the local coalition, the Carroll County Lynching Memorial Project. Putting something together like this is incredibly difficult and takes a lot of people, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of patience. And the Carroll County group has achieved all of that. You know, all of these hearings that have been held by this commission have relied on the structure of county coalitions all over the state. The coalitions were there before the commission was there. And the work of these coalitions is so incredibly important. So I wanted to thank, you know, we held this meeting, the meeting that Kevin referred to in February. It exactly 5 years ago, February of 2020, at the library. And it's been a privilege to support the work of the Carroll County Group, and we will continue to do that. And I also just did want to mention, everyone was already thanked, but I want to make sure that Jennifer Haber is recognized for her work as well. She did yeoman's labor in Anne Arundel County before she moved back here to Westminster, and she has done so much to rekindle the spark that keeps this group going. So I want to make sure that we recognize that as well. And I also want to invite all of you who are interested, who may not be involved with the coalition yet, but who are moved by what you've heard here today and understand the importance of it, to get involved with the coalition. Once the marker is up, once the soil has been collected, white supremacy is still going to be among us. It's still going to be in the air that we breathe. So I think it's really important to continue to do that work. You know, sadly, I don't think we're going to ever live in a country where it's not important to do this work, to remember our history of racial terror. But that being the case, we'll continue to do the work, to remind people and to confront that tragic history. And thank you very much for coming and moving forward.
Well, my name is Rodney Morris. I'm the current president of the local NAACP. First of all, I want to thank the commission for being here this morning and this afternoon. I want to thank the local representatives that's on this lynching project. You all have been working diligently and hard for this day. And I want you all to know that we recognize the work that you all have done. But I also want us to remind each other that, first of all, we are human. I am a human being. It's so hard for so many people to recognize that I am human. All of us in this room are human. We're human beings. I'm just so fortunate I'm a black human, and I'm proud of being black. And my beautiful skin that we have, even though he has a rope around his neck, to recognize that we're here for a reason. And we have to understand that. I want to be treated the same as any other human. But I also recognize that we're not in a fair system. So it's an uphill battle. But most of you all in this room have taken that sacrifice and trying to make a difference. And we need that work to continue as we move forward. We keep saying we don't want to repeat the past, but what do? We keep repeating the past because we haven't learned from our history. And as we honor Mr. Townsend Cook and so many individuals just like him that have been persecuted unfairly in this system just because he was seen as being inhuman. And it was easy to do as others watched and celebrated his death, not recognizing how important his life is. So, again, I want to say thank you all for being here and the work that you are continuing to do. This work is not over. This is not an end. Make sure his name is not just a benchmark or footnote in the history book to say that this individual was one of thousands. This is Maryland's history. It's a small part of its history, but it's a big, important part because it matters that people's lives were taken unnecessarily. And as we move forward, we have to remind ourselves, again, the country reminding us that it wants to continue to repeat this oppressive lifestyle of history. But it's up to us again to say that we're not going to tolerate it. And as we in this Carroll County, I'm originally from Baltimore. So every time I hear the stuff about Baltimoreans, I just look at them and say, you realize I'm from Baltimore? And you want to recognize me as somebody that you believe is successful, then that means you don't respect other people that look like me. So we have to learn to respect one another, and as we continue to move in this, this depressive cycle that we think we're in, but we've been here before. So we know how to navigate through these channels, and this is why we have to hold those elected officials accountable, that they needed to do the job that we put them in place to do. And it doesn't matter what party you're from, because we're all humans, and we all should be respected and shown the same dignity as everyone else. And on that message, I want our college students to recognize there is no place that you cannot go that you feel unsafe. Because if you feel unsafe, that means that somebody has placed fear in your heart. And if you have that fear, you're not going to make that sacrifice to take that challenge to move forward. So take that challenge, accept it, move forward, recognize that you can do anything that you want to do. And let your heart drive you in that manner, and you'll be okay. Thank you all.
Good afternoon. My name is Diane Hurd, and I am a co-founder of Speak On It, Act On It, a nonprofit agency here in Carroll County. I was not planning on getting up here today. But I felt I needed to. Towson Cook was lynched in 1885. And I look out in this room right now, and there's a lynching happening right here today. There are not enough people of color in this room. There are not enough people of color from Carroll County in this room to hear this story. Our minds have been lynched. We as African Americans don't believe that we should be in this room hearing our history, understanding what we've gone through, understanding what Towson Cook and his family, what your ancestors, what my ancestors have gone through. No matter what we do here in Carroll County, I can count on my white brothers and sisters to be there. But I can't count on my African American or other brown people of color to be a part of that. Our minds have been lynched. And I am calling on each and every one of you to reach out and help our brothers and sisters here in Carroll County and across the country, across the nation, across the world to understand how important our history is. We built this country. We'll never get credit for it. Okay? We continue to give our blood, sweat, and tears. We'll never get credit for it. But we're not asking for credit. You know why? Because we're not showing up. We're in the background somewhere talking amongst ourselves, but we're not showing up. And until we show up, speak out, act out, speak on it, act on it. Until we start to do those things, we're never going to see the change that we want to see. So I challenge each and every one of you to go out and talk to your brothers and sisters of color and tell them about how we are still being lynched. And it's our fault partially because, again, we won't show up. So thank you. Thank you for all that did show up. Brown, black, white, or otherwise, thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for being who you are and doing what you've done to bring this opportunity to Carroll County and to Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you for each and every person who has come forward and shared comments, reflections. Do we have anybody else in the room? So before we close the public comment period, I just want to bring forward again, even when the hearing ends, we will still collect comments, testimony, recommendations to our email, which is MLTRC@maryland.gov. We do look forward to receiving those emails. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Millen. Before we close out, I do want to make space for my fellow commissioners to share any thoughts they may have at this time, and Commissioner DeCreary is going to kick us off. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of things that occurred to me as I was listening to our experts provide their testimony. And I guess the first thing that sort of came to me was Amiri Baraka, the poet, at one point said that Black art should be such a perfect representation of Black reality that when white people see it, they see the horror of what they've done and they lose their minds. And in thinking about the history, what should this history do? I always say, I don't want your guilt. White guilt does nothing for me. What I want is for you to see this history and to be indignant, to be so upset by it that you have to do something. I don't want your guilt, I want your indignation. And hopefully that will inspire your action. The other thing a couple of people have said, sort of brought me back to Du Bois, Dr. W.B. Du Bois's question at the end of the Souls of Black Folk in the chapter of Sorrow Songs, where he says, talking about, look at all the things that we've done. We've been here before the Pilgrims, actively weaving ourselves into the warp and the woof of American society. Would America be America without her Negro people? And it always strikes me, a colleague of mine at Bowie said, well, I don't know if it'd be America, but it'd be a sure more boring place, that's for sure. And so, yeah, here we are. Here we are at the beginning of Black History Month when the federal government is no longer recognizing Black History Month. And yet we're still gonna have the Dr. King holiday and all of that, but we're not gonna recognize, we can't forget the history. And again, it's an uncomfortable history. And as I always tell folks, when doing the DEI work that I do, if this is making you feel uncomfortable, then you need to ask yourself, why are you uncomfortable? And again, I don't want your guilt, I want your indignation. So let's get righteously indignant and keep this work going. And hell yeah, we made it through all of the regional hearings. Thank you all.
Okay. Commissioner Haley, I recognize you.
Thank you very much. So I had different concepts in my head, and I'm not sure which ones I'm going to go with right now. But one of them is that I like to think when I talk about us as a community of a crayon box, because as a member of the Black community, I was brought up and I realized in the face of my cousins, in the face of my family members, that some looked white, some looked like night, and some looked like the sunrise and the sunset. And so I think in our world, if we consider ourselves part of a 48 or 64 or 16 member crayon box, they're all different shades, but they all take up the same space. The problem is, the challenge is when one of those crayons decides to take up more space than they are allotted in that box. And that's what the problem is today. That's what the problem has been. But also on a more, I feel, positive note, which as a person who loves history, loves genealogy and all those things, literally as I was sitting here right now, I thought, as horrible as what's been happening is happening, I thought in terms of history, as Professor Cleary said, and all of us has mentioned today, there is going to be a history in the future done by somebody like a Ken Burns or somebody else, because I think he's already, 70 or 80 years? But there's going to be a history of this time, a history of this period of MAGA, a history of this period of Doge, a history of this period of oppression against those who no longer want to be oppressed. And that history, what we're talking about, when it emerged and when it was submerged by the people who decided it was too much. And it's either going to implode from within or explode from without. And so that gives me a sense of hope and confidence, because I think if I was younger, I look forward to 20 or 40 years ago from here when people are going to talk about this period and how did that happen, because it will be over. And that's what I think about today, that as we leave, think in terms of there's going to be documentaries about this time, about how it rose up and then how it was defeated. And it may take 4 years as World War II, and that rise took a little bit longer. It may be as long as the Civil War, but rose to that and to be the ending of slavery and then the ending of Reconstruction and the ending of Jim Crow. But there's going to be a period when this oppression will end. And as it's been mentioned before, from the grassroots, your county councilors, your school board, do be involved, even if it's just giving $20 online. I mean, not always do we want to be speakers up front. I didn't think about saying anything more than my 2-page comments earlier. But just the smallest thing is something where you could say, I was a part of that history. I lived through that period when things were bad. We couldn't say the word diversity, inclusion, equity. When did patriotic become a bad word? When did saying you represent America become racism? That's a bad thing. But I lived through that period, and now it's good again, and now it's okay again. I lived through that. For you young people, it's such an honor to have you here. It makes us all feel good, truly, truly. You're really young. You'll be here. You may write that history of when it changed. You're a part of that. And you can be a part of how you were at this panel on February 1st in Westminster, and you heard these people celebrating the last time they were going to have a live hearing of a county. You were a part of that history. And you're on video too, so you can see yourself too. But you're a part of this. And again, we all should leave here at least with the thought that this will be over one day and there'll be a history about it. And you will tell your kids, yeah, I was there for that. And I'm so glad it's over. And it was that bad. But now it's so much better. Thank you.
So my name's Elizabeth Hughes, and I have 2 observations, one personal and one related to this work directly and what we've experienced in our office this past week. The personal one is that my husband grew up in Westminster, and both his parents went to McDaniel College. They became educators. He was a middle school principal, and she was a math teacher. They're now deceased. And my husband went to high school here. And when I told him I was coming here for this hearing, he said to me, there was a lynching in Carroll County? So, you know, that really speaks to, right, the need for education, not just here, all over the state, about this history. and I'll add, if I don't stop by Boggers and pick up some rolls on my way home, I will not be allowed in. So the second observation is that this week, all state historic preservation offices, like the Maryland Historical Trust, receive funding through the National Park Service. And because of the recent OMB memo and executive orders and so forth, our funding portal was shut down and we weren't sure what the future held, and then it reopened, and with all the court injunctions and things. But the other thing we have been very successful at the past couple of years has been to receive grants from the National Park Service through their Underrepresented Communities Grant Program and their African American Civil Rights Program, both of which can be used to identify and document historic places associated with the stories of marginalized communities, be it people of color, resources associated with women's suffrage, LGBTQ, and we've been very progressive in being able to use those federal dollars to do that work. I think with the recent executive order that's come out, we're not sure if we're going to receive payments to continue those grants. We're not sure that those grant programs will continue to exist. It's a huge loss. But I feel very fortunate that here in Maryland, we have an administration that I know will continue to be supportive of that work that we're doing and the type of work that we're doing here, both at the administration level and in the General Assembly, which passed the bill that created this commission. So while I'm very concerned about what's going on at the federal level and how that's going to trickle down, I feel very fortunate to be in Maryland where this work is supported, and we will be continuing to labor in this area with your engagement and support of this work as well. So, thank you.
So it's very apropos that we are in this space of faith, because I hope that the time that you've spent with us this morning and afternoon reinforces a very common universal truth. And because we are in this particular house of faith, I hope that you'll indulge me to emphasize this. Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and all the prophets. You can do what you want with the first one. That's up to you. I respect your faith or lack thereof, however it shows up. But I'm going to check you on the second one. I'm going to check you on the second one. And I say this to those in this space. I say that to those who are watching. I say that to the lawmakers, the policymakers, the random people on the internet. If you view and experience what we've done this morning and afternoon, and you don't understand how it is in direct violation of what God himself, choose you to believe that, said is a great commandment, I question your faith. Wholeheartedly, I question your faith. This goes beyond skin color. This goes beyond ancestry. This goes beyond origin. This goes down to a fundamental human truth that at the end of the day, all we want, like my brother here said, we don't want your guilt. That don't pay for crap. But what is fulfilling, what is meaningful, what it truly is all about is for us to be acknowledged, appreciated, respected, understood, and yes, the most important thing, loved. The only charge that I have for you after being in this sacred space, within a sacred space, within a sacred space, is that you exude those virtues as best you can. That you look at what's happening in your city, your county, your state, your country, and this world. And if it falls in opposition to those existential determinants, call it out. Do what you can to make sure that it shows up everywhere it needs to be, because it needs to be everywhere. Love is not mutually exclusive. Love does not abide by the zero-sum game. Love truly is for everyone. And if anyone is telling you otherwise, they a goddamn lie. Sorry, that's why, yeah. But I had to say it with that level of emphasis, because that's what it comes down to. Fundamentally, the lynching of Towson Cook was the lack of love. Add all the other layers on it too, because those are true as well. But it's a fundamental lack of love. And you know what? Those who exhibit the lack of love, they're hurting inside. I've yet to see a person who surrounds themselves with hate, who surrounds themselves with fear, and they're actually feeling good inside. So I ask you, what is hate getting you that love can't get you? I'll say that again. What is hate getting you that love can't get you better? As you pay attention to all the stories that are happening around this world, ask yourself this. Who's benefiting from the story that they're telling you? I'm gonna give you a spoiler. It's not where you're looking. So do me a favor. Turn around. You'll find your answer. So with that, I thank you all for being in this space. I thank our elected officials. I thank our dignitaries for, again, bearing witness to the wisdom, to the healing, to the truth, to the love that was in this space. I give appreciation to all that made this happen, starting with our county liaisons, Commissioner Creary, Commissioner Millen, to our project manager, Trish Floyd, to our old project manager, Stephanie Thompson, who graced us with her presence, yeah. To our representatives from the OAG's office, Kristen McFarland, Sophia Sige, who joined us. To our American Sign Language interpreters, thank you for making sure that this is accessible to people to be a part of this experience. To our event stream team for capturing this, so even if you weren't here in real time, you can go and see this again and again and again to remind yourselves of the truth that was shared here. To Maryland State Police for making sure no foolishness happened in this space. To former Maryland State Police who made sure no foolishness happened in this space, right? To all of our witnesses, to our expert witnesses, to our descendants, we thank them for the wisdom that just reinforced what we knew all along. I hope that you all are encouraged. I hope that you all are empowered. The most important thing that you can do is what you can. That's all we're asking. Oh yeah, absolutely, our local partners. I was gonna get to them too. I forget. No, I learned my mistake from last week. To our local coalition, Jim Coons, I'm just gonna call you out just because I had the chance to meet him a while back. I'm glad that we reconnected in this way. To the other members of the local coalition, if you wanna just raise your hand, stand up, make sure that you're recognized so we can give you a clap. Absolutely. Absolutely. As Will Schwartz says, this work did not start with us. It started with the local coalitions. It started with local historians. It started with local genealogists. It started with people who were committed to the truth. And we thank them. We thank them because this work is not easy, but you made it a little bit easier for us. And to this space, to St. Paul's United Methodist Church, thank you. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you for giving us such an apropos space in which this truth could be shared. United Church of Christ, I'm sorry. United Church of Christ, St. Paul's United Church of Christ, get that right. You can edit that out. Much gratitude to you, St. Paul's United Church of Christ, for giving us this very appropriate space to have this moment. And so with that, do what you can. Speak on it, act on it, live on it, believe it, think it, do it, be it. We cool? All right. Now with that, I ask that we accept the testimony, the wisdom, the information, the history that was shared today. Is there a second? All right, so moved. And with that, we bring this hearing to an end. Thank you all for your presence. Thank you all for your humanity. That is all that matters. Exude it. And happy Black History Month.